Oh, yeah. It's very long.
Wish I could do that.
Had something left when I had all over my head.
Yeah, it's all over right there.
Can you hear us? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Hello, how are you?
Hello?
Hello, how are you? Can you hear us? Hello?
You see when you put spaces from the information system?
Yeah, I went like this when I came in. My whole
It actually happened to me a while back. I was sitting there. And I was like, what is all this glass up there?
Can you hear us? Hello? Hello? Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Hello? 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 Is Narayan?
Yes, okay.
He can't hear us for some reason. Could one of you log into the chat and see if you're getting sound?
say something.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Try it again.
Hello? Hello? Nothing? Hello?
Since I'm the only one here.
Okay.
Might be in the wrong one. Try it again.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah. Hmm. Say something, Rhonda.
Can you hear me? You hear me? Hello? Hello?
I don't know.
Is your speaker turned up?
Yeah. It's turned all the way up.
Hello? Hello? Ramiro?
Yeah. Oh,
All right. I don't know.
I can hear my his computer.
You couldn't hear me on yours?
Google's doing something weird.
I try to stay calm today. It's hot in here. I want to get irritated for no reason.
Can you get irritated when you're hot?
What do I?
I just want to go to sleep.
When you're hot?
Yeah.
I'm like, damn, I can't get this cold.
If we're really hot, I will just go to sleep.
Remember my air conditioner went out one summer, like July, August.
Yeah, I can't sleep when it's too hot.
It was terrible. I consider sleeping in my car.
I usually sleep with air off if I'm on my own and not like with mine, because they have that air. If I'm on my own, I usually sleep with air off.
I turn the ceiling fan on, then I have another fan on. I have to have cold air.
Oh, let me open up. If I'm cold, it's hard for me to sleep.
What?
Yeah.
Like, my feet have to be warm too, because like otherwise I just be up for a longer time.
I have to be freezing. I don't understand what 60 is.
That's what my mom. It's so cold. I don't even know how we were like our mother and daughter.
Yeah.
Like she's got low voice, I high voice. She likes cold, I like hot. Like these niggas.
I was that fight. Like somebody turns it up.
I don't even fight her. She always just goes. You want me to turn it? I'm okay. I'll put on the sweater. That's fine. I just wear a sweater. I just like it. It's okay.
It's hot. I cannot handle it.
I think it's cooling down, right?
I hope it is.
I feel cooler.
Maybe it's the cold water I'm drinking. I'm just looking at 82 on the thermostat.
I used to be 84 when I came in.
About 2.
I think he might be able to hear us. We'll see.
Okay.
But yeah, because you want me here, I feel warm.
Okay, he can hear us. All right. All right. So just to review what we did last time, because we've been away for a while. So what we did last time was basically we had an HTML form. If we go to app, views, and then class surveys, and we go to the new html.erb file, you can see that we have now we have a form for at survey. So we converted our essentially the HTML form that we had. It was just pure HTML. Now we're using these helper methods to create some of our form. So for example, we have form 4, we have f.date field, f.radio button, and we have all this functions. Right? And it pretty much does the same thing. We still haven't seen what the benefit is of doing this, but today we're going to get to see a little bit of that. So before we continue, does anybody have any questions on this? Okay. And those windows are closed, right?
For a minute, I thought I was imagining that sound, and now I'm sure.
Okay.
You hear the music, right? Like
Yeah.
playing some kind of like, okay.
Yeah, it's like a carnival or something.
Yeah.
Maybe the knee go up a little bit on our clothes.
Sure.
Okay.
I have 32 lines instead of 31.
You have, wait, how many lines you said?
32.
I have 33. Well, no, I left some things and it commented them out, so that makes sense.
Can you go up a little?
That's it.
I mean,
Down. So what we're going to talk about today is a concept called validation. Because I think a few of you, I think especially Crystal, you were wondering like, we should probably give a better message when we create the survey versus just says survey completed successfully. Like what if it wasn't completed successfully?
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. So that's what we're going to deal with today with validations. So validations is a concept in Rails where you have your model, and then your model has different attributes, right? So in this case, our survey model has a date attribute, and it has a difficulty attribute, and it has a comments attribute, and a user ID attribute, right?
Mhm.
So it has all those attributes. So, but a validation is making sure that the data in each of those attributes either is present or it has some sort of format or some sort of values. So what would be some examples of those things? So the first one is very obvious, that there's a value there or not. So for example, comments, either there can be comments or maybe there's no comments, right? So a validation that requires comments would check if your model has comments, and then if it doesn't have comments, it's not going to let you save that model. So it's not going to let you add it to the database. Or another example would be maybe the difficulty. We want the difficulty to be a number between 1 and 5. So we don't want it to be 0 or less, and we don't want it to be 6 or greater. And so a validation that checks that constraint would not let you save the model if that constraint is not met. So for example, if somebody puts for the difficulty 8, the validation would say, okay, that's not within the acceptable values, so I'm not going to let the user save this validation. It's not going to allow you to put it in the database. So that's a high level description of what validations are. And in different frameworks, they're implemented in different ways. In Rails, in order to implement, in order to specify a validation, you go to the model. So in this case, we go to app, models, and then you open up our model, which is class survey.rb. So we have the class right here, right? And then you're going to add some code in the class that's going to specify the validations for this particular model. So each model is going to have its set of validations. You can think about these validations as constraints. So I don't remember a lot of the code for how to define some of these validations, and this is something that you can just look up, whenever you need to. But Rails has a really good page. Well, if you Google Rails validations, on Rails guides, Ruby on Rails guides, you're going to see active record validations. So the simplest one, and the one that we're going to talk about today, is validates. And then, yeah, that's that syntax, right? So the validates is a method, and you're essentially telling Rails that you want to add a validation for this class. So you write validates, and that's the method that you're calling. And then you pass it the name of the attribute that you want the validation on. So for in the example right here, they pass it the symbol name because they want the validation to be on the name attribute. Okay.
I think that should be on the difficulty. Someone may or may not have a comment, but they should all have a rating.
Yeah. So let's do that one. Difficulty. So we want to do a validation on difficulty, right? And then the very simple one is presence is true. So it's that we do a comma, and then so after this it's a hash. So first is the first value that we pass to this method is the name of the attribute that we're trying to do the validation on, and then after that we're passing a hash, and that hash is going to describe the validation, what type of validation it is. If there's a range associated with that validation, and then we'll see in a minute how you pass those other attributes. But in this particular case, we just write presence and then true, I believe.
Okay. Like you can do it like a Boolean, which is true or false, or do it like a float, or we're asking between a certain range.
Yeah, you can say that it can either be true or false, like the value can only be either true or false. You can also say that it has to be a certain numeric range. Or if it's a string, you can specify that the string has to have a particular format. For example, it has to look like an email address with an @ symbol, and then a .com or something like that. Yeah. And then you even have the ability to create your own validations. So if there's something that's not offered by Rails, then Rails gives you the ability for you to create a method. And in that method, you can write whatever kind of validation you want. So it can be very, very general. But the simplest one is, presence true, which presence is just a symbol right here in this. Right, we're just passing in a hash, and this hash just has one entry, just one. The key is presence, the value is true. So the Rails takes that hash and says, okay, presence is true. If we don't pass presence true, then Rails doesn't add that type of validation. But since we're passing presence true, then Rails says, okay, they intend for this attribute to not be empty. So there has to be a value in order to be saved. Right. Questions on that? All right. All right. So that's it. That we added a validation for the attribute difficulty.
Now, do we on the page where we make a new one? Do we add a if statement to the creation, like the creation method, where if it's valid, then go to successfully created. If it's invalid, go to something went wrong, please try again.
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's what we would do. Yep. And so we're going to get to that in a second. But yep. So now these validations work these validations are tied to the save method. So when you call the save method, ActiveRecord is going to do these checks. So and that's whether you're running a the Rails application as a server, or whether you're running it in the Rails console. So I'm going to go to the Rails console, Rails C, just so that we can see, what it does first, and then we'll switch to the server side, Rails server. So I'm going to do s equals class survey new. So I'm just instantiating a new class survey, right? And then typically what we did to save a survey is we just call the save method, right? So I'm going to do that as.save. Now I haven't set any of the attributes, right? And specifically, I haven't set difficulty to anything. So this should not be valid, right? It should not allow me to save this because I haven't set difficulty to anything. And I added the validation that difficulty has to be present. So I'm going to call s.save, and you see that it returns false. So that's how you know. Typically, if you do s.save, it would return true if it successfully saved the model that you were trying to save. In this case, it returned false. And that's because the validations didn't pass. There's another method called s.valid ? That also returns false if the validations don't pass. So the safe method is going to call this s.valid method, and if it returns false, then it's going to return false itself. That's how it's working. So so now if let me set difficulty to something. So difficulty equals, let's say 3. So I'm going to call the s.valid method, and now you see that now it returns true, right? If I do s.save, now it saves it, right? Because now there's a value in difficulty. All right. So now let's see. Now I have this survey that I just created, right? Which has ID value 7, right? I could change the difficulty. I could update the difficulty just by doing s.difficulty equals 2 and doing s.save. And you see that it calls the update. The SQL is the update. So it's updating that particular survey with ID 7. And it's updating difficulty to 2, right? If I do s.difficulty equals nil, so now difficulty is no longer there. There's no difficulty set anymore. I basically unset it. If I do s.save, now it returns false because difficulty is not there. So this validation works when you're creating your model, saving your model to the database for the very first time, and it also works when you're updating the database. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see. All right. So the other thing is, so if I call the s.valid method here, you see it returns false. The other thing is that when you call the s.save method or the s.valid method, there's a rail, like, right now it just tells you false. Okay, it's not valid. Or when you call s.save, it couldn't save it, right? But it doesn't really tell you why it couldn't save it, right? So every object, or not every object, but every model has a method called errors, and that returns an object. This is called this is of type active model errors. And this object describes why it couldn't save the object, or why the model is not valid at this moment. All right, so let me create a new class survey. So I'm doing class survey.new, and then I'm going to do s.errors. And in s.errors, you're going to see a few things. You're going to see first, there's my model itself. So base is pointing to the object itself. So if I did s.errors .base, or actually we can't call base, but yeah, so there it's referencing the model. The errors are referencing the model. Then there's messages, and right now messages is an empty hash, right? And then we also have this other method called details, and it's also an empty hash, right? And it's, so we just created the model. Let's see, that's our object. Difficulty is nil. So is this right now, as it stands, is this model valid or invalid? Invalid, right? But it doesn't tell us why it's invalid right now. And that's because we haven't told Rails to check whether it's valid or not. Yeah. So once we do that, so as.valid question mark, all right? So now if we do as.errors, now you see that messages and details now are no longer just an empty hash. Now they have something in there. So if I do now errors.messages, you see that it's a hash, and it has this this key, which is difficulty, which is this. It basically just tells us that that's the attribute that the error is on, and then it tells us what the error is. So difficulty can be blank, right? So difficulty is the attribute that it did the validation on. And then can be blank is why there's an error on that attribute. Right, and then details just gives you the same information, but it just gives you in a more detailed format. Difficulty, error, blank. Okay. This is the error message, and this kind of tells you why there's an error. Any questions?
Is there a toString method where you can just, or I don't know if you want to display that code to the user, but is there a toString method for the error to show it in like a less Ruby way, like displaying right now?
That's a good question. I think the answer is that you can change what this error message is. This can't be blank. For presence is true. This is what Rails gives you. If you want it to be something else, you could change it. And so what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be displaying these error messages to the user. Okay, so that's the next thing. So now I'm going to go to my controller, because that's where I call the save method. So controllers and then class surveys controller. Okay, so here we're calling this survey.save method, right? So now what we want to do here is, if we successfully save the survey, we want to display, that the survey was saved successfully. Otherwise, we want to display something else, right? I think that makes sense. So in order to do that, you obviously do an if statement. So if survey.save, then we just we're gonna do something, and then else, and then end. Right? Okay. Let's see. So by default, since we're in the create action, by default, this template, the create.html.erb template, is going to be displayed by default. So if survey.save, that means that the survey was saved successfully. I'm just going to display this template. Else, what I'm going to do, and we'll see in a minute why, what I'm going to do is I'm going to display this other template, new.html.erb. So in order to do that, I don't think we've seen this yet, but you call the render, and then you pass it a hash action, and then you're telling Rails that you want to render the action new. And what that's going to do is that Rails is going to try to find the new.html.erb template and is going to try to render that. Now, in our new.html.erb, we're expecting the object survey, or a variable named @survey. But in this particular action, the create action, we haven't set that variable, right? So that's the other thing that I'm going to change. I'm going to just change the variable name survey to @survey. So then that's the survey that's going to be reused here, or reused, not reused, but used in this view. Okay, so I'm going to start my Rails server. And then let's see, share.
I forgot to put a button on the main page.
Oh, yeah, we haven't done that. You're right. I'm just going to create another user because I think I forgot my password. So it's a survey. It's the URL. So this is our form, right? So if I just select something there, like 4, and I click create class survey, then it says survey completed successfully. Let me refresh this page to create another survey. And then I'm not going to select anything. And you see that it doesn't save, right? It just takes me back to this page, right? So it's not saving because I didn't select a value here for difficulty. Now I don't have an error yet. I don't have an error message. And so that's the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to show that error message. Okay, so now the error message, since we are rendering this view, then we want to show the error message here in this view. Okay. So I'm gonna show it at the top. I'm gonna do if statement. If, let's see, if survey, or if not survey not valid, so it means that the survey is not valid.
Are you thinking if not?
Yeah, because if it's not valid, then we want to show the error message.
I just haven't seen if not.
Oh, yeah, this is a Boolean operator that just negates this true statement. So if you might have seen it in other languages like this, like the exclamation mark. Okay. And then here we're going to display error. I'm going to type the word error. And then later on we'll add your what type of error. So here I don't have a difficulty selected, so I'm going to click create class survey. And now you see that we have that error there. So now in order to display the error, what we want to do is we want to do at survey messages each do. So we're going to iterate through that hash, and then I'm going to do the key, the value. And let me go back to here so that you can see how messages looks. So messages is just a hash that where the key is the attribute, and then this array has all the errors for that attribute. Right?
So if you don't need the error before messages, you can just dot messages.
Say that again.
You don't need to put survey.error, it's dot messages.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
That was a mistake. Thanks for catching it. Save survey.errors. Okay, and then, well, let me change these variables so they're more descriptive. So instead of K, this is the attribute. And instead of B, these are the errors. Now, I'm going to indent that as well. So then I'm going to output attribute, value for attribute. So I need the embedded Ruby symbol, this called symbol, attribute. Well, let's see. Errors is an array. This right here is an array. So I'm going to iterate through that array. I'm going to do another iteration. So errors.each do. And then this one, since it's an array, I don't need a key and a value. I just need one value. So this one is specific error. And then inside that iteration, I have attribute, from up here. And then I'm going to display the error. I mean, the only thing I'm doing is that I'm taking that hash, which looks like this, and then I'm using it to show something to the user. Right? So this is how it looks. Let's see.
Oh, do we put, oh yeah, there we go.
Okay, so then I'm not going to select a difficulty again, and I'm going to click create class survey. Okay, so we have a bug. Let's see. Oh, I'm missing a close right here. So let me try again. So you see now it says difficulty can't be blank, right?
I got another here. I got another message here.
And let me take a look at it. Hold on.
It's not pretty, but it works. We need headers for this thing.
Yeah.
Right. Everything's all smushed at the top.
Okay, so you have
You're in the deer. That's what
survey and then new. Okay, so let's see. And then in the controller, you change the variable name, right? Oh, you need to change the variable name here. Okay, so another thing that we probably also want is the date. We don't want it to, we want them to put a date, right? So that's another validation that we could add. So let's do that. So I'm gonna do, did you get it?
I got something else. I'm not sure what I might do that.
You're missing one here on line 10, like at. So let's add that other validation. So I'm going to open up the model, and then right after that line, I'm going to do validates date and then presence as well. Presence true. Okay. And then I'm going to try to save this again. Create class survey. And now you see that now we have difficulty can't be blank and date can be blank. And it's not pretty, right? But we'll get to that later. And the important thing is that the functionality is there. But you see that basically we now any validation that we decide to add, the error is going to be there, right? It's going to show up there. Let's see.
Could we write? Is it print or which one puts it on a new line? Each thing on a new line. Is it
BR. BR. Because you're talking. Let me go to the HTML document. So we would add a BR here. So that's just the HTML code.
I was thinking Ruby.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we do that, then yeah, they're on separate lines, right?
Cool. That's much better.
I mean, the other thing that we could do is we could add Bootstrap. So let's see. They do have some styling for errors. They have alerts. Alert. Where they have them. I think they have them on their components, maybe. Yeah, on their components. So this is what they look like. And so you just add the class div alert and then alert danger. So if we do that, let's see how that would look. So I'm just going to enclose this in a div, class equals alert danger. Then I'm going to click save again. And now you can see that it's each error has, it's like its own error. I think that might be too much. So let me just do one alert. So div class equals alert danger. And then here, instead of this, I'm going to do a UL, an order list. And then each one of these errors is going to be in its own list item element, which is LI. So let me see, click there. So I think that looks a little bit better, right? Now, the cool thing is if I were to select 4, for example, now that message is no longer there, right? But something else happened as well that is probably not obvious right now. Anyone have any guesses? Something unexpected happened.
What, do you already saved it?
Yeah, let me click on it again. I'm gonna click on it. Okay.
Is it supposed to keep the thing selected, the difficulty selected?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. So now the thing is selected, and there's a very specific reason why that is. And so it's important to understand why, just so you get an understanding of how things are working in the background. So the reason it's selected is because we're using this form 4. So we're using form 4, and then we're using this f.radio button. So f.radio button, that method, radio button, checks the value of the survey object and then sets the values properly. So this is let's look at the HTML that was generated. And let's see, I don't know if it'll work here in this particular example. Yeah, I think it might not work. But if we were to look at the HTML, this one is set. So let me close that, and then I'm going to set the date to 3/9/2017. And you see that that date stays there, right? If I were to turn that back to how it was, so how it was, what we used to have before, we used to have input type equals text, and then name equals date, and class equals form control. And let me delete that. If I were to do what we had before, which was just plain HTML, and then I were to click save on this, see that the date doesn't get saved between requests. So what's happening? Yeah, go ahead.
Is it, does that have something to do with how you were saying before, whenever you pull up the page, once the thing is pulled up, it kind of stops that, stops that action. It doesn't carry that information on to the next place you go to. It doesn't hold it. But something with how Bootstrap is working is holding that information over. So when you refresh, it's keeping track of what you had in there before, probably for user ease, so that they can just type in more stuff and still have what they were before. So it's something in the Bootstrap code that's saving it, because normally it wouldn't save it.
Yeah, that's a good guess, but it's not. It's actually not keeping track of it. What's happening is that, so let me undo this. This is the magic, where that magic happens right here. This method called date field. That's where the magic happens. So I'm gonna save that. So, and then I'm gonna go, like refresh it. So I have a completely new page. So right now I'm gonna type in 09/03/2017. Now when I click on create class survey, I'm gonna submit this information, right? And then what's gonna happen is that this method is gonna handle that submission, right? All right, so what does that method do? So that method takes the information that the user sent. It takes difficulty, date, and comments. It creates a new object, and then we set that variable add survey to that new object. And so this variable add survey has as difficulty whatever the user passed. It has as date whatever the user passed, and comments whatever the user passed, right? So that's what it has. Now over here we render this view, and then when we render this view, we come over here. Now on this right here, on this method date field, think about that we're calling f.date field, right? We're calling f.date field. So f is this f right here that gets passed from this method call. So when we're calling this function form4@survey, we're passing it this object survey that has the information, the difficulty that the user passed to us. It has the comments that the user passed to us, and it has the date that the user passed to us. So form4, we're calling that function and we're passing it that object. And then this form is going to call this method, and it's going to pass to us this form object. Now this form object is going to have a pointer internally, and this is hard to see because we can't see it right here, but it's going to have a pointer internally to this object survey. And then when we call f.date field, what it's trying to do, what we're telling it to do is to create an input element. And it's going to do like type equals date, name equals date. But then it's going to do something extra. What it's going to do is that it's going to, okay, we have that f. And then what object is f pointing to? F is pointing to survey, right? So then this method is going to call the method date on this survey, and it's going to get the value of date that this object has.
Okay, I'm thinking of it kind of like when we do stuff in the console and you're working on an object, you give something a value or whatever, and it's like kind of temporarily held. Mm-hmm. Once you exit the console, if you have to save it to something, like it's just gone. But while you're working in there, that information is still temporarily stored. So while they're working on that page, it still has that information that they typed in before temporarily served to save survey that isn't saved yet. Saved
yeah,
yet.
Exactly. That's how it is. Yep. So yeah, this object, this method is going to look at what that value is, and it's going to create an input element with that value. Now and then it's going to send back a form with that value. Now at that point, since we didn't save the object, then that object ceases to exist. But if we were to submit the form again, then we are resending the information, and then it's going to create temporarily a new object with that information. So that is simulating, kind of like holding temporarily that value, although it's really not, but it feels like it is. Right?
Yeah.
If we were to close this browser, for example, and then reopen this page, that information would be gone because it's not on the server, and now it's no longer in our browser. Does that make sense?
And that's all because of form 4?
Yeah.
I didn't know form contained all that extra capability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So let's look at like one of the first things that we created, which was, I think, the toy app. If we look at the toy app, this code was generated to us, right? And so I'm going to look at views, and then users, and let's look at this form.html.erb underscore form. So you see that right here, the code that was generated for us, it's using a slightly different method, but essentially it's doing the same thing. This one is called form width. And so it's, then over here we have, the block, instead of F, they're doing the variable form. And then they're saying form.text field name. So that's doing the same thing, right? One other thing that I wanted to do is go back to these validations, right? So let me just, I'm out of that, and then I'm just going to go to the URL survey, and you see that it gives us some errors, right? But we haven't even tried to save this object, right? So why is it giving us those errors? So the reason is because we have this, let me go back to new.html.erb. And so the reason is because we're calling if not survey.valid. So at the, when we first, this method gets called, when we go to that URL. and we're creating a new survey, and it's obviously not going to have a difficulty. But what we're doing is that we are right here calling that valid. So we are asking the Active Record to check if that object is valid or not. So a better way to do this would actually be, if there are any errors, then we want to show this. If there are no errors, then don't show it. So we can change that instead to add survey errors, and then that messages, that length is greater than 0. Right? So errors is that object that returns the errors, the description for the errors, and then messages is the hash that contains the description for the errors. So if that hash messages has something, so if the length is greater than 0, then we want to display this. Otherwise, we don't display it. So now if I go over here, then you see that it doesn't show up. If I click on create class survey, then it shows up.
Still showing some pink at the top.
Let's see. Are you? Here's the code. If at survey that errors that messages that length greater than 0. Is that what you have?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So there are many different ways, of doing this, because that information is pretty detailed. So there are many different ways of doing it. So for example, the generated code is that there's actually a method called any ? On errors. So that's also another thing that we could have done. Right? So we could change that to errors any ? A little nicer, shorter, right? So yeah. And then the other thing that they do is, let's see. Then they also try to count how many errors there are. But then there's another method called full messages instead of just messages. So full messages basically just does that for us. So let's do that instead of messages that each do, full messages that each do, and then that's an array. So let me open up the console and then show you how that looks. So s equals class survey.new, and then s.valid. So s.errors.full messages. So it just returns an array with already the attribute appended to the error message. And it does another nice thing, that it capitalizes the attribute name. So if let's go back and update that. So full messages that error, or let's do message. And we don't need that other loop. And then here we would just do message. Now let's try to save. So it looks almost the same, but I think it looks a little bit nicer. The code just looks a little nicer.
Do we need to close out that list?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Typically, most browsers are not going to complain, but it's good practice to just close it. All right, so I just want to say a few more things about this. So if we went back to our library app, do you guys remember that on our views folder, we had a new form, a form to create a new book. And then we also have a form to edit a book, right? So we had two forms, two HTML forms. One to create the book, and then one to edit the book. With this, and the reason we had two forms is because one form was just empty fields, and then the edit form had values. So, for example, a value equals book.title, all of that, right? So now with this method, in theory, we could just reuse the same code for both creating an entirely new book or creating or updating the book, right? And so if you look at the toy app, that's essentially what they did. They just have form.html.erb, which is used by both new and edit. So that's one thing. Questions on that? And we'll get to practice with some of this later on. And then the other thing that I want to mention is that we really did like the simplest possible validation. It's there or it's not there. So the other ones are a little bit more complicated. Let's look at one that's more complicated. For example, this one, format. So validates legacy code. Legacy code is the attribute that we're trying to validate. And then format with, and then here we have this weird thing, which is a regular expression. And then the message only allows letters, right? So this one it's more complicated. What this one's doing is basically legacy code. That attribute in format. This right here?
Yeah.
That's a regular expression. I don't know if you guys seen it in the previous class, maybe? We did?
Yeah, I remember that. And you said that we probably wouldn't memorize it, so we could look it up to type it in. We could use it for something.
Okay. Yeah, it's a regular expression, and basically it matches, strings, and it checks that strings are a particular format. Um, another cool one is length. That's also pretty simple to understand. So length, so validates name length, minimum at 2. So this validation right here,
I found it when we did the book.
what do we do? What do we use it
The
for?
attached file. When we did the
Oh,
attached file.
right. Yeah. Hmm.
It was a slightly different variation, but it was with the image instead of for letters.
Yeah. So yeah, we're in that case we're trying to match the type of file that we're loading. Yep.
So it's the same thing, but instead you're trying to match the type of string, the string content, the letters.
Well, both are matching on a string,
Okay.
and so what we were doing over there was that we were the file that the user uploaded had a string that was the type of file,
Okay.
and so then we were matching on that string.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's the regular expressions, you always match on strings. And so if you just have to convert something to a string and then use the regular expression to see if it matches a pattern or not. Yep. So then in this validation, the name has to have the string name has to be at least 2 characters. In this validation, the string bio has to be less than 500 characters. Here, the string password has to be between 6 and 20 characters. And then here, this registration number, the length has to be exactly six characters. Right? So you can just look, at this documentation and try to find different types of validations that Active Record provides for you. So yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll continue into the next topic and see if you have any questions on validations. I'm gonna get some water. Feels like the temperature never went down. Still 84.
Trying to think cool. Helping out a little bit. Just have to make another half hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Allow now. Oh, that'd be handy.
Which one?
Allow now.
Oh, this one right here?
Yeah.
Yep. So it looks like size can be either small, medium, or large, or nil in this particular case. So yeah, it's really extensive. You know what validations can do. So the best thing to do is just know that they exist, and then whenever you always think about how do I keep my data as pristine as possible, so the users are not entering in data that could be problematic later. And then once you think, okay, I need the data to be like this, then you go to the documentation and start looking for some validation that could help you. And in some cases, you might have to write your own validation.
So the message option, which you specified the message that would added.
Yeah. Exactly. So if we wanted to do it here in our example, let me see. Go here, and then I believe it would be presence, and then message missing instead of can be blank. So let me see if that works. So you see that now the message says is missing versus can be blank, and then you can change it to whatever you want. So it's not set by the user. So now it says date was not set by the dummy user. You don't want to insult the user. Although sometimes you feel like insulting the user, but you shouldn't. All right, so I guess we can continue. Or let's see. Oh, Narayan said, "Can you please push the LS Code library app into GitHub?" Okay. right, so we'll continue then. Okay. All right, so to motivate this, so far what we have with our app is that we have this survey, and then the user, let me start the server.
So we have to make it so that we have the two things left, or they're making the two things left to automatically send out the surveys to the students whenever there's a class.
Yep.
And a way to search for. Do we do the search?
We haven't.
Okay, that's what that.
Yeah, like
for the surveys,
kind of like a way to view like the results of the survey, right?
Yeah, so the teacher, you can see what everyone sent in.
Right. Yep. Yep. So that's exactly. So what we're going to concentrate on now is sending the survey when the class is over.
Okay.
So what we've done, and it was very simple to do, and it was a good place to start, was that the survey just has a date, and the student has to fill out the date.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't work well. It probably doesn't work well, but it was a good starting point. So now we're going to try to improve on that. So what we probably want to do is we probably just want to send like just a difficulty. The user just has to fill out the difficulty and the comments, and that's it, right? So then how would we have information about what day the survey is for, right? So that's that's the question, right? So I'm going to propose something, and it'll probably may not make sense initially, but maybe it'll start to make sense as we go through it. So what I'm going to propose is that we create another model called lesson. Let's just say lesson. And so what we're going to be doing is that every time there's a new class, we're going to add a new lesson to the database, and then we're going to send out a survey, and then that's a particular survey is going to be tied to a specific lesson. Right, so maybe you don't see it clearly right now. So so let's just start and create the model first. So let's yeah, go ahead.
I thought you would do something like the day that it's sent out would be the date for the survey, and then you would have it. Does Ruby have a way of keeping track of time? Like how many days have passed? Because that is a timestamp, so it should have a way of keeping track of time, right?
Mm-hmm. So
how much time has passed?
Yeah, so we could send something where yeah, I mean you're perfectly right. So one way that we could do it is that the URL could be something like question mark date equals the date for the survey,
Mhm.
right? 2017 0708, and then we would save that as um, a hidden, not a hidden variable, but a input hidden, and then we could do that. Yeah, that's exactly one way that you could do it. Yep.
Okay.
Um,
But I'm here to see the lesson.
Yep. So we're gonna do it this way, and then because this way gives us a few other benefits for potentially doing other stuff in the future. But and those are probably not clear right now. But you could do it the way you're describing. Yep. So I'm going to create another model. So remember that to create a model, you do a Rails new model, and then this one is going to be lesson. Let's see, can initialize, should be Rails generate model lesson. So that's going to give me a migration. So I'm going to go to migrations, let's see, DB, and it's going to be the third migration. So here it is, the lesson, right? Okay, so what I'm thinking with this lesson is that the lesson table or the lessons table is going to describe when we have a lesson. So one of the attributes that we would have would be a date. That's just the date when the lesson happened. I will leave the t.timestamps. And I think that should be it for now. Let's see. But it doesn't have to be, right? So another thing that we could add here, for example, is we could add a link to the YouTube video. So string video, the video URL. Another thing that we could add is, let's do text this time, is notes. So maybe something, so in those notes, we could put like the link to the GitHub page for that lesson, right? Or we could have notes that tell us a little bit what we learned that day. Stuff about that particular day, what happened that day.
What's the difference between text and string?
Oh, have we not seen text before? I may not have covered it. So yeah. So that's a very good question. So in Ruby, you just have the type string. In a database, you have two types, string and text. String is typically for strings that are maybe like 500 characters at the most, 1,000 characters. Text is going to be for pretty much infinite number of characters, or as much space as the database has. Yeah, and the real difference is because databases make some optimizations, different optimizations in how the strings are searched. But for our purposes, well, at least in Ruby, they're both going to map to a string, a type string. This is just for the database type. But good question. Yeah.
So what would be the difference in the search?
In the database, for example, like I think this this type of string, just string, it's faster to search, but it's also when you're adding it to the database, it's slower to add to the database. So for example, if you were adding, if your database had a lot of users and they were constantly adding this kind of stuff, then it might slow down adding to your database. And so, yeah, those are some of the considerations that somebody would think about for our purposes, and probably for the purposes of the apps that we're going to be building in Code the Dream, even during the internship phase. They're probably really not going to matter, because the differences where it would make a difference are if you have like millions or thousands of users all at once. So for our purposes, it's not really going to matter. I'm just so used to, thinking, oh, this is a really long string versus a short string. And that's why I instinctively just wrote text, because I'm thinking notes is potentially going to be like a really long string. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is how our lesson looks, right? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call the Rails VB migrate. And so now we should have a lesson object. So if I go to the console, I do lesson dot, let's see, lesson dot new, and you see that it has that stuff. All right. So now, what I said before is that every survey, I want to associate it to a particular class, which in this case we're calling lesson. So every survey has to be associated to a particular lesson, right? So if I go to my migration, what I have here is I have the columns user ID, date, difficulty, and comments, right? So how would I associate the survey to a lesson? Any ideas? I have to modify this table to have the information about what lesson it's associated.
ID or something?
Yeah, so you would, and what would be the type?
Integer.
Yep. So we want to add another column on the class surveys table that's of type integer, right? And then the name is lesson ID, right? Now the other thing is this date. This date is not needed anymore, because this date now is going to be in the lesson. So the other thing would be nice to remove that date, that column, right? So that's what I'm going to do is in order to do that though, I'm going to create another migration. So Rails generate migration, and then this is add lesson to class survey. I'm going to open up my migration, and then right here I'm going to do add column class surveys. That's the name of the table, and then the name of the column that I'm adding is lesson ID, and the type is integer. So those are just the parameters to the add column method. Is just class surveys is the name of the table, the column name that we're adding, and then the type of the column. And then I want to remove a column from class surveys, and the column that I want to remove is date.
You don't need to specify what type it is for that.
Right, yeah, you don't have to specify it because you're removing it, so you don't care what the type is. So let me run that migration. So Rails DB migrate. Okay, so it's there. So now if I open up the Rails console, and let's see, I do s equals class survey.new, and you see that date is no longer there.
So we need to remove it when we made a new object.
From the form, yep.
Yeah, and also I think from our controller.
From our controller as well, yep. And then you see that lesson ID here is at the end, right? So it's there. All right. Okay. So now, like Crystal said, that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go to app, views, and then new.html.erb. And then I'm gonna remove this, the date. And then in its place, I'm going to add a hidden field for the lesson ID. So f.hidden field, and then lesson ID.
Do you want the equal?
No, you're right. Well, no, I do want the equal, and I want the equal because I want that HTML to be generated. Now, when it's not going to show in the browser because the browser is not going to show it,
Okay.
but I do want that HTML to be sent to the browser. So again, I'm using the form helper, the Rails form helper. So I'm doing f.hidden field. Right? So I might have some errors, but let me just refresh this. I haven't changed the controller, but I just want to see if my form is doing okay. Okay, so it looks like it's working. And then let me check the HTML. And we have that input hidden name class survey lesson ID right here. Right? So it's showing. Okay. So then now my controller, if I go here to controllers, class surveys controller, then I want to remove date, or really what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to lesson ID. And then let's see. Okay, so right here, we don't have a way for the user to enter the lesson ID, right? But like we were going to do with the date, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pass it in the URL. So if I wanted to do a survey for lesson ID 6, for example, so that's that's how it would look. That's the URL. So if I look at the form, it doesn't have a value, right? And the reason it doesn't have a value is because right here in survey equals class survey.new, I haven't set the value. So here in my new action, I'm going to set the value. So lesson ID equals params lesson ID. And this params is coming from the URL, from the get parameters. So then if I refresh, and then I take a look at the source code, then you see that it has value 6. Right? So then I'm going to select, let's say 3, and then save it. Okay, so we have an error. It says undefined method date. Did you mean update? So it's giving us that error because we added a validation for date.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to go to app models class survey, and then right here I'm going to remove that validation.
Can we change the validation to lesson? Can we do that? Lesson ID.
Let's see.
Should we not?
Should we? Let's not do it for now. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to save it again. Try to save it again, and it looks like it's saved successfully. So I'm just going to go here to the Rails console, and I'm going to do a class survey.last. And we see that the last survey that was saved, it has lesson ID 6. Right? Okay. Makes sense? Cool. We haven't created any lessons, right? So if we do, if I'm in the console, we have lesson.count, there's 0. So we haven't created any lessons. So there's no lesson 6, right? So that's kind of weird because we were able to save a survey for lesson 6 when there's no lesson 6. So we're going to deal with that in the future. Let's see. Okay. So what we're going to do, what I'm going to do now, well, the time we have is I'm going to try to create a form to be able to create lessons. So I'm going to generate a controller, Rails generate controller, and then this is going to be the lessons controller. So in this controller, I'm going to define a new method to create a controller. And then also the create method.
It wasn't plural, right? It was just lesson.
It's lessons, yeah. When you have a controller, you want to do it plural. You want to pluralize it. Okay, and so here is going to be at lesson equals lesson.new. Very, very, very similar to class surveys controller. Basically, it's going to be very similar to this. So at lesson equals lesson.new, and for create is going to be, let's see, I'm just going to copy from surveys. It's going to be so similar. Instead of survey params, is going to be lesson params. And then here we're going to require lesson. And this is going to be a date. What are the attributes? Let's see, date, video URL, and notes. And then here is going to be that lesson equals lesson.new with lesson params. There's no user ID, and then we're going to try to save lesson. And then if we can't save it, then we're going to render action.new. It's very, very similar to now I also want to create a view, views, and it's going to be very similar to the new.html.erb for class surveys. So I'm just going to copy that. You can kind of see why there's a generate for, where we generate all this code before, because some of this can be repetitive. So I'm going to go to lessons and then create a new file, new.html.erb. So instead, I'm just going to change survey to lesson. And then right here is going to be a lesson.errors.full message. And then form for lesson. Okay, so I'm going to remove all this. And then, okay, so form group. And then now we're going to have the date. So date field, date. And then class form control. Placeholder date. And we're going to do the same thing, but text field for the video URL. And then for the notes, it's going to be very similar to comments, but instead of comments, it's going to be notes. So the placeholder is going to be notes. Okay, so that's the HTML, the template. Okay, and then we're gonna add our routes to config routes.rb. And they're going to be very similar. So it's going to be get /lesson. And then this is going to be going to go to the lessons controller and the action new. And then as lessons. And then post to lesson. You go to lessons controller and then the create action. So it's this, pretty much the same thing as the surveys. So let's see if we can save a lesson. So lessons, actually the URL should be lesson. I have to start my server. So Rails S. Okay, so we have, looks like we have our form. So let's see, July 8, 2017. Video URL. Well, we can just take this one. That's for today's class. And then the notes is we cover validations and started associations. So create lesson. Okay, there's an error. Oh, it inserted it, but we haven't added a success action, right? So what I'm going to do for this particular case is that I'm also going to add an index action that's going to show all the lessons. So right here, I'm going to do lessons equals lesson.all. And then when I save a lesson successfully, I'm going to redirect to lessons, the URL lessons. In my routes, I'm going to do a get lessons, and it goes to lessons controller and the index action. And then right here, I need to add a view for that. So it's going to be index.html.erb. And then I want to do a table with a class table and table order. And then my headings are going to be 8 and video URL. And let's see, notes. And then lessons that each do lesson. And then that's another row. And here we have lesson.date. And then video URL, notes. So if I went to lessons, see, lessons have defined 2 routes with the same name. Let's see. Well, I'm going to do this one as lessons/new. And then this one is just a post on lessons. So and remove that. Let's see. Okay, so we have a lesson right here, right? And so we have our ability to create lessons. I know that I went pretty fast there. I was just trying to get it done. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to commit that code, git, and then git commit. Okay, so I committed the code. So if you have time at home, you can take a look at that code if you didn't get a chance to do that. But you should, at home, you should be able to go to the URL lessons new. Let me start in my server again. So you should be able to go to the URL lessons new, and then you should be able to create a lesson here, create a lesson. You can see that we can just continue adding lessons. So that's it. The code's committed. Make sure that you copy it, what we did, and go through the code. If you have any questions, ask for help on the channel. But for next time, what we're going to do is we're going to see how that association is going to work between surveys and lessons. And so the concept from Rails that we're going to learn about is called relationships. We're going to learn about relationships in Rails. So yeah, that's it. Do you guys have any questions? Okay. All right. So I'll see you guys next time. Have a good week.